Welcome back to Panorama of the Bible Online. We are moving now into movement number 2, and just to remind ourselves of the scene, where we're at in the story. When we finish movement 1, we see that God has created everything in this universe for His glory, for our joy, that He might bless the world through humans. He might dwell with His people that He's made, and through them bless the world. But instead, this power called sin and evil is now wrecking the plan. And the answer, as we move out of movement number 1 into movement number 2, is how will God respond? What will God's response be to the mess that we find ourselves in as we leave the prologue of the Bible, this first 11 chapters? Now, as we move into session number 2, movement number 2, we're going to see that God has a plan. And that plan is going to be through a family. It's going to be through a people, and that people is going to be the family called Israel. And what we're going to look at here are the patriarchs, or the fathers of Israel. And that's movement number 2. We call it the patriarchs. Movement number 1 of the Panorama timeline is prologue. It's creation, fall, flood, and tower. And then movement number 2 of the Panorama timeline is patriarchs, and it has 4 key people. They are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And if you look on page 28 of your Panorama workbook, we have the second part of the book of Genesis shaded for you. Last week, we looked at the first big part of the book of Genesis, which is chapters 1 to 11. That's the creation, fall, flood, tower. And now we move on to the second huge section of this first book of our Bible, which tells the story of these fathers, this particular family. And as we look at that, that's going to be chapters 12 to 50. And it, once again, is these key figures: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. If you look down at the narrow context, you can see here is all of the material of these fathers broken up by chapter. And you can see lots of material on Abraham, a little bit less on Isaac than Jacob and Joseph. And there's the story. And if you're trying to get your arms around the book of Genesis, these charts can be really, really helpful. Now, as we look at page 29, you can see them charted just like straight through on your timeline. That's going to be how we're going to be trying to memorizing this. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And what we're going to notice is, and I'm going to give you this as a challenge, these are really fascinating characters to get to pause and stop and study. And so if you are looking for discipleship material or maybe devotional, personal growth material, these would be really helpful things to dive into each one of these characters and just simply ask the question, what does this person's life teach me about trusting Yahweh, trusting God? How do I see them succeed and fail in trusting God? And what we're going to notice as we look through this book of Genesis, I think we come to the table into the Old Testament, especially these first 5 books, the Torah, and I think our first inclination is to say, yeah, that is the law. It's all about laws. And what we're going to notice is it's not that at all. This is a story, it's a narrative, and that narrative is trying to teach us to trust Yahweh. It's wisdom literature explaining what does it look like to trust Yahweh. And in light of that, go dive into each one of these characters. We're going to work through them as we go here in session number 2, movement number 2. But just take a look at each one of those characters in your own personal quiet time. Maybe you have somebody you're discipling to read through the story together, and just note, how are they trusting Yahweh and failing to trust Yahweh? And then what can you learn from that and try to apply that wisdom to your life? And so we're going to be working our way through these characters. I know movement 1 can feel like you're drinking from a fire hydrant. It's just lots of big, weighty material, and we're going to be able to slow the pace down as we are here in movement 2, Patriarchs, which has 4 key people: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So let's dive in.